For most people, Sun Tzu exists as a quote rather than a thinker. His name is repeated in boardrooms, business podcasts, and motivational posts, usually by people who have never actually read him. He is treated as a philosopher of domination, a master of winning, a mystic who unlocked the psychology of conflict. But that version of Sun Tzu is convenient, simplified, and ultimately incorrect. Because when you strip away the slogans and read the art of war for what it actually is, a very different figure emerges. Sun Tzu was not obsessed with winning battles. He was obsessed with avoiding them. He was not fascinated by glory, honor, or heroism. He was fascinated by cost. He understood something that most rulers in history refused to accept. War is not primarily a military problem, it is an economic one. And once you understand that, the art of war stops sounding like ancient poetry and starts sounding like a warning. Sun Tzu lived in a world that was bleeding itself dry. Late spring and autumn China, moving into the Warring States era, was defined by permanent instability. Dozens of rival states existed in a condition of constant insecurity, each convinced that unification was inevitable and that one more war would finally secure it. Alliances formed and collapsed, borders shifted constantly, and armies grew larger with every generation. What had once been ritualized combat between aristocrats evolved into mass mobilization involving hundreds of thousands of soldiers. This transformation changed everything. Warfare was no longer symbolic, it became industrial in scale, and the economic consequences were devastating. Every campaign required food, metal, labor, transportation, storage, taxation, and administration on a scale no previous society had experienced. States were no longer just fighting each other, they were stress testing their own economies. When a ruler ordered an army to march, he was not just risking soldiers, he was removing farmers from the fields, craftsmen from workshops, and labor from infrastructure. He was redirecting metal from tools to weapons, and grain from civilians to troops. He was raising taxes, borrowing for the future, and gambling that victory would come before exhaustion. And very often, it didn't. Campaigns dragged on, supply lines stretched, treasuries emptied, peasant unrest followed. Internal collapse became as dangerous as any external enemy. Sun Tzu observed this pattern again and again, and he realized that most rulers fundamentally misunderstood the nature of war. They believed the enemy army was the greatest threat. Sun Tzu believed their own spending was. This is why the art of war begins not with inspiration, but with a warning. Sun Tzu writes that war is of vital importance to the state, not honorable, not glorious, vital, meaning dangerous, destabilizing, and capable of destroying the very society it claims to protect. From the very first line, he frames war as a risk, not a virtue. He understood that once a state commits to war, it enters a financial emergency. Every day that passes increases exposure. Every delay multiplies cost. Victory is meaningless if the treasury collapses afterward. This is the core of Sun Tzu's thinking, and it is the part most people miss. One of the most famous lines in The Art of War is often treated as mystical wisdom. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. This line is quoted endlessly, usually without understanding what it actually means. Sun Tzu was not promoting cleverness for its own sake, he was describing cost avoidance. Winning without fighting means no mobilization, no supply drain, no agricultural collapse, no tax shock, no long-term economic damage. It means achieving political objectives without triggering the financial machinery of war. In modern terms, it means zero marginal cost. To Sun Tzu, this was not idealism, it was discipline. Throughout the text, Sun Tzu returns again and again to the same principle. Prolonged warfare destroys states. He states plainly that no nation has ever benefited from extended conflict. This is not philosophy, it is accounting. The longer a campaign lasts, the more it erodes a state's ability to function. Food production collapses, markets destabilize, labor shortages emerge, inflation follows, public confidence weakens, and eventually, internal collapse becomes inevitable. Sun Tzu understood that time is not neutral in war. Time is expensive. Every additional day in the field burns resources that can never be recovered. This is why Sun Tzu places such extraordinary emphasis on speed. Modern readers often interpret his insistence on speed as a call for aggression, but that is a misunderstanding. Speed is not about striking harder, it is about reducing burn rate. An army that moves quickly shortens supply lines, limits exposure, and reduces cumulative cost. A slow campaign is not cautious, it is financially reckless. Sun Tzu saw delay as waste. He knew that even a victorious army could destroy its own state if it lingered too long in the field. Speed to him was not a tactical preference, it was fiscal discipline. Logistics occupy an unusually large portion of the art of war, especially for a text supposedly about combat. Sun Tzu devotes extensive attention to food, transport, distance, and supply exhaustion. He explains that transporting provisions over long distances costs more than feeding soldiers themselves. He notes that maintaining armies in the field drains agricultural labor and weakens the domestic economy. He warns rulers that commanders who chase small victories while ignoring supply costs are not heroes, but liabilities. His message is brutally clear. Logistics do not support strategy. Logistics are strategy. An army's ability to fight is inseparable from a state's ability to pay. Sun Tzu's treatment of intelligence reveals the same economic logic. He describes spies not as instruments of intrigue, but as tools of efficiency. A single, well-placed spy can prevent an entire army from marching in the wrong direction. One piece of accurate information can save months of campaigning and massive expense. Sun Tzu writes that foreknowledge is what enables extraordinary success. In the ancient world, foreknowledge was simply data. Sun Tzu understood that ignorance leads to misallocation of force, and misallocation of force leads to misallocation of capital. Information, by comparison, is cheap. This made intelligence the most cost-effective weapon available. What makes Sun Tzu extraordinary is that he treated war as a balance sheet centuries before economics existed as a formal discipline. He calculated opportunity cost intuitively. Every soldier deployed was a worker removed from the economy. Every campaign prolonged was wealth destroyed. Every unnecessary battle was capital wasted. Sun Tzu did not oppose war in principle. He opposed waste, and the greatest waste in his view was fighting battles that could have been avoided by planning, diplomacy, deception, or deterrence. This perspective made him an anomaly among military thinkers. While others glorified courage and conquest, Sun Tzu glorified restraint. He had no patience for generals who sought fame at the expense of stability. He believed that rulers who enjoyed warfare for its own sake would eventually ruin their states. Behind his calm, poetic language lies a ruthless accounting principle. If you treat war like a passion instead of a liability, you will eventually default. History repeatedly proved him right. States that poured their wealth into prolonged sieges and endless campaigns often collapsed internally regardless of battlefield success. Others, which applied Sun Tzu's logic by prioritizing intelligence, alliances, rapid maneuver, and psychological pressure, survived longer and maintained stability. The difference was not courage, it was discipline. The states that understood war as a financial instrument wielded it sparingly. The states that treated war as a test of honor burned themselves out. What makes Sun Tzu's thinking even more relevant is how clearly it applies to the modern world. The technology has changed, but the math has not. Modern wars are still lost economically before they are lost militarily. The Soviet Union in Afghanistan, the United States in Vietnam, and the European powers in World War I did not collapse because their soldiers lacked bravery. They collapsed because the economic model behind their wars was unsustainable. Sun Tzu would have recognized these failures instantly. Prolonged conflict erodes the state faster than the enemy ever could. Modern strategy increasingly reflects Sun Tzu's logic, even when leaders do not acknowledge it. Cyber warfare, sanctions, proxy conflicts, information campaigns, and strategic deterrence all aim to achieve political objectives while minimizing direct cost. These are Sun Tzu's ideas in modern form. They prioritize efficiency over force and preservation over spectacle. The most powerful states in the world today still operate inside Sun Tzu's balance sheet. At the deepest level, Sun Tzu believed the true strength came not from armies alone, but from economic resilience. A state's real power lies in its ability to absorb shocks, recover, and continue functioning. He lived in an era when kingdoms collapsed because they overspent on wars they could not sustain. We live in an era where great powers face the same dilemma through debt, supply chains, and resource dependency. Sun Tzu might not recognize modern technology, but he would immediately recognize the financial pressures behind it. The lesson most people miss is that Sun Tzu was not teaching rulers how to win wars. He was teaching them how to avoid national bankruptcy. He understood that the cost of conflict always outlives the conflict itself. States do not fail because they lose battles. They fail because they drain the capital.
They fail because they drain the capital that keeps them coherent, confident, and functional. Victory is irrelevant if the economy collapses afterward. The best war, in Sun Tzu's view, is the one that does not require rebuilding your society when it ends. When you read The Art of War through this lens, it becomes something entirely different. It is not a book about aggression. It is a book about restraint. It does not glorify triumph. It glorifies stability. To Sun Tzu, the ruler who preserves resources is wiser than the ruler who conquers cities. The general who wins without fighting is wiser than the general who destroys armies. And the state that knows when not to act is stronger than the one that acts out of pride. Sun Tzu was not a warrior philosopher. He was a steward of solvency. He understood that war is the most expensive policy decision a state can make, and that rulers who miscalculate its cost sign their own death warrants. His message is simple, unsettling, and timeless. Strength is not measured by how hard you strike, but by how much you can afford to strike and how long you can endure. History does not repeat itself, but unpaid bills always come due, and the nations that forget this lesson always pay in full.